Concern is growing over a looming famine in eastern Africa, where the UN's World Food Program has estimated that 20 million people are in need of assistance. Aid groups say conflict, corruption, and drought are all contributing factors. In Ethiopia's war-torn Tigray and Amhara regions, the government recently confirmed that hundreds of people have died due to starvation in recent months, a rare acknowledgement of the crisis. DW's Mariel Muller looks at the situation outside.
Ethiopia endured a catastrophic famine that has been around since the 1980s. This catastrophe took the lives of more than 400,000 Ethiopians due to drought, civil war, and failed aid distribution.
And the very fact that food was not really coming up to the level that is required, and this coupled with the drought situation and the desert locust infestation, all these factors playing against the people's livelihood.
It's not just about drought. There is a deliberate human actions involved that shaped this famine. It was done by none other than their own government. United States Agency for International Development and the United Nations Food Program had to suspend the food aid given to millions of Ethiopians after discovering that all along the food aid was being diverted and sold on the markets. Based on the internal document and reports, the diversion scheme was reportedly orchestrated by the federal and regional government entities. USAID investigations found that the military units were benefiting from the humanitarian assistance. And donated flour was being sold on the open market and even re-exported. That in one town, stolen food represented enough to feed 134,000 people for a whole month. This incident has been repeated for decades throughout the history. It goes as far as from 1983, where the Derg regime manipulated aid as part of the counterinsurgency, restricting access and using organized policies that amplified famine effects. This event perfectly illustrates the flawed foundation of what we call development. Chapter 3 critiques SDGs, stating that the claimed successes in poverty reduction are to a significant extent based on statistical manipulations. Reflecting how famine relief focused on aid over systemic economic issues, perpetuating capitalist frameworks. Furthermore, in Chapter 2, it says that there are two different approaches into this underdevelopment. The first approach is the big institutions approach like the UNDP and World Bank, which says that this is just a technical problem, poor implementations, weak governance, and lack of redistributions. But there were another approach into this problem. The second approach was advocated by many scholars that influenced by Marxists, which reframed underdevelopment as structural and political problem rather than technical. They saw it as the product of unequal global power relations and trade structures. The Ethiopian famine exposes the limits of technical aid fixes, revealing how global inequalities perpetuate crisis and urging structural post-development solutions that addresses the root causes.
Yes, Europe is a garden. We have built a garden. Everything works. It's the best combination of political freedom, economic prosperity, and social cohesion that the humankind has been able to build. There's three things together. And here Bruges is maybe the good representation of beautiful things, intellectual life, well-being. The rest of the world, and you know very well, Federica, is not exactly a garden. The rest of the world, most of the rest of the world is the jungle. And the jungle could invade the garden. And the gardeners should take care of it.
The United Kingdom is the world's sixth largest economy with a GDP of £2.8 trillion in 2024, faced a shocking food bank crisis by 2025. Over 3 million people, including 1 million children, relied on food banks annually, according to the Trussell Trust. Sparked by austerity measures post-2008, rising living costs, and welfare cuts, this crisis revealed deep inequality in a nation celebrated for its wealth.
The UK is a wealthy country, but its welfare system doesn't cover all needs. and some people have insecure income or low, stagnant wages.
The cost of living crisis essentially comes from high housing, fuel and food costs. It's been going on for so long now that many are accumulating serious debt, and the only way to manage is with help. The Trussell Trust is a national anti-poverty charity. It handed out over 1.4 million emergency food parcels in the last 6 months.
1 in 5 children faced food insecurities. Despite economic growth, stagnant wages with the real income falling 2.1% from 2019 to 2024, food reliance on overstretched charities, with food bank usage rising 37% in that period. Soaring energy prices up 54% in 2022 alone due to the global market volatility and reaching £3,500 annually for average household by 2023, pushes families into poverty, unable to afford both heating and food. Looking at the temperature in the houses there could reach -4 degrees Celsius. This phenomenon reminds me about this statement on chapter 13, where it says, "Why do we talk mainly about doing development over there in the third world and not in the inner city of the West?" And also an observation in chapter 2, the increase of international migrations, which is already playing a key disruptive role in international relations, connects to the northern deprivation, showing essentialist development models fails to address internal marginalization. This crisis exposes development's blind spot in the north, requiring ontological and epistemological reassessments. 22nd January marked the 40th anniversary of the longest-running peasant movement in Brazil's history and one of the largest in Latin America, the Landless Rural Workers Movement, or the MST movement. Starting as a group of rural farmers fighting for agrarian reforms against land dispossessions, the MST has transformed over 4 decades into a mass workers' movement that mobilizes against the fascist political forces in Brazil while defending the country's food system and small farmers from predatory agribusiness.
Brazil, even nowadays, it's one of the countries with the highest land concentration. So around 1% of the big landowners own more than 50% of all lands in Brazil. So the land issue in Brazil since the invasion of the Portuguese, it's like one of the most structural issues of the Brazilian society.
The movement faced violence with 1,150 activists killed since its start and legal battles against powerful landowners. Despite these challenges, MST persists with over 33 million members as if right now. Highlights in Chapter 3's post-development stating that post-development can offer alternatives to current practices in development, aid by raising issues such as the struggle of indigenous people against development, projects and other models of organizing society beyond the dominant paradigm of development. Akin to MST's non-Western land reform challenging SDG's capitalist model, Chapter 6 calls for pluriversal knowledge and agency to cultivate post-development futures, also aligns with MST's eco-cultural identity, resisting space of coloniality through sustainable community-led agriculture. MST's achievement shows how alternative models can transform societies, which I personally say that existing for over 40 years definitely stand the test of time. Deep in the Ecuadorian Amazon live the Quechua people of Sarayaku. For generations, their world has been the forest. In the early 2000s, their world was threatened when an oil company, with the government's blessing, moved in to explore for oil, cutting paths, laying explosives, disrupting their sacred lands, but the Sarayaku people decided to fight back.
They believe that Pachamama, or the spirit of the forest, is always with them and works with the forest to keep the people healthy and safe. For example, our arrival was greeted with a heavy rainstorm that was later explained as a warning to the community that outsiders had entered their land. The people of Sarayaku believe that they live with nature.
Company's 2003 incursion used explosive, threatening sacred lands and water sources. Government-backed extraction initially ignored Sarayaku's rights, risking deforestation and cultural loss, and with the community resistant, and in 2012, legal victories was finally achieved.
Bueno, las personas anteriormente, ese tiempo no sabía qué es la contaminación, tomaban ese río y causaban enfermedad, cáncer y murieron. Así que ganamos y que queremos que limpie todo lo que ellos han dejado.
Chapter 3 says that the struggle of indigenous people against development projects, like Sarayaku's resistance as post-development rejecting SDGs, model based on inequality, pollution, and non-sustainable use of resources. Also, Chapter 6's pluriversal transition and radical space of engagement reflects Sarayaku's defense of ecocultural identity against spaces of coloniality where the state systematically controls. Sarayaku's victory proves indigenous-led resistance can redefine development, prioritizing ecological and cultural integrity.
How about a handshake?
There we go. Here's like this, no? No. There we go.
Mexico's Zapatista movement, born in the Chiapas in 1994, caught global attention with an uprising costing 145 lives in 12 days. All of this has happened about 2 years after NAFTA agreement has been reached. These farmers could not compete with the imported goods. That is why the goal of this movement was to gain autonomy upon their own land.
Que después del diálogo y de todo el proceso del cese al fuego dice que las negociaciones fracasaron, que el diálogo es un fracaso. Evidentemente que ese señor va a querer negociar con las armas. O sea, quiere decir, va a querer dialogar a tiros con nosotros.
Clashes and ongoing threats from narco-trafficking and land disputes challenged their autonomy, with dozens of attacks and their declaration of war against Mexican government in 1994. But fast forward to nowadays, in 2025, the EZLN governs 1,000 autonomous communities, managing schools, health clinics, and economies based on indigenous principles, inspiring worldwide movement to self-rule against neoliberal policies. Chapter 3 actually cites the Zapatista self-rules in Mexico as an alternative based on non-Western models of politics, the economy, and knowledge, countering the SDGs capitalist framework. And Chapter 6's pluriversal knowledge and agency supports Zapatistas through radical place-based governance. The Zapatistas demonstrate that non-Western models can sustain communities, redefining development's core principles.
This is with respect to the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline. Dakota Access Pipeline. Again, subject to terms and conditions to be negotiated by us. This is construction of pipelines in this country.
Dakota, the Standing Rock Sioux led protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline from 2016 to 2017, facing over 760 arrests and 15 injuries. By 2025, the pipeline, carrying 570,000 barrels of oil daily, continues to threaten sacred land and water for 17 million downstream, sparking a global outcry for indigenous and environmental rights. Militarized police responses, including water cannons in freezing condition and potential spills risking water contamination, exposed corporate greed and government complicity. The pipeline's approval ignored Sioux treaty rights, prioritizing profit over people and planet.
We've got to change the federal government's relationship to the Native American people. The Native American people in this country have been taken advantage of for too long. They have been lied to. They have been exploited. That has got to change.
Chapter 3 frames this as the struggle of indigenous people against development projects, critiquing SDGs model based on inequality, pollution, and non-sustainable use of resources. Chapter 6's Space of Coloniality, where the state systematically controls to counter extractivist violence. This conflict was about much more than the environmental risk of an oil spill. It was about broken treaties, national sovereignty, and the desecration of sacred burial grounds. For the Standing Rock Sioux, it was yet another chapter in a long and painful history of the US government and corporation prioritizing profit over the rights and well-being of indigenous people. What does it mean to truly pursue global economic development? It is about shattering the chains of colonial legacies, amplifying the resilient voices of communities like the MST, Sarayaku, and Zapatistas, and forging a world where justice and sustainability reign. It demands we confront entrenched inequalities, challenge flawed systems, and embrace diverse ways of knowing and being. This journey requires unwavering courage and collective resolve to transform our planet for all its people. This is not an easy thing to do, and this is not an easy thing to accomplish.
When there was doubt,
Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why 35 years ago fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too. It is for these reasons.
Oh, no, not me. I did it. 1, 0. For what is a man? What has he got? If not himself, then he has not to say the things he truly feels, and not the words.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. At the foot of the ladder, the limb. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Is it lighting halfway decent? Yes, indeed. They've got the flag up now, and you can feel stars and stripes on the limb. Up now.